Hey there, welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come together and talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we meet a distinguished guest and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in the arts. So you could be a grizzled veteran collecting royalties in a bunker from an undisclosed location, or otherwise a frustrated genius just getting your start or still waiting for a break. Either way, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it was a wonderful last month on the road. Since our last podcast, I got to do some shows in the Midwest, in Ohio and Michigan, with the young force of nature that is Andrew Combs, whose solo show is sounding better than ever. I got to visit with producer, audiophile, and most interesting man in the world candidate, Dwayne Lundy, in Kentucky, who has now moved his studio catty-cornered to the notorious Lexington dive bar, the Green Lantern. So I don't expect to get much accomplished next time I work there. I expect only to drink High Life, which is the most god-awful beer on the face of the planet, shoot some legendarily bad pool games, and surreptitiously steal a framed Red Dog beer poster off the wall in a drunken haze, as I did during the recording of Windfall. I'm sorry to the proprietors of the Green Lantern if you're listening, but I think I did fund your bar for an entire month in 2014, so let's go ahead and call it even. And also I got to play some shows with Portland stalwarts and old friends, Horse Feathers, who, even though I'm pretty sure they were stealing valuables from my green room while I performed my set, are wonderful folks, and I love seeing them. Even if my iPad is missing, and even if I had to buy back a watch my grandfather gave me on his deathbed through a fence on Craigslist. Their shows are great, and they're still a band I can get behind. If I were you, I would buy their albums, attend their shows, support them in every way, but just keep an eye on your valuables and the possessions that are important to you when you see them approaching. That's it. If you'd like to hear some of my songs live, I will be on the road in the coming month, so come on out. Austin, Texas, June 3rd. Conroe, Texas, June 4th. San Antonio, June 5th. Dallas, June 6th. Some of those shows will be with the up-and-coming bluegrass duo from North Carolina, Mandolin Orange, so don't miss those co-build shows. Oklahoma City on June 11th, where Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook will be opening with a tender acoustic project they've put together. Los Angeles at the Echo on July 8th. San Francisco at the Independent on July 9th. Actually, I think the Echo is July 7th. Use your Google machine to figure it out. And we're probably adding some more California dates around then, so keep your eyes peeled on our website, particularly if you live in San Diego or San Luis Obispo. I'm going to mention this at the end of the program, but since we haven't finalized a sponsor yet, I'll just mention it here at the top of the broadcast as well, because we don't make you sit through too much hectoring. If you enjoy the show, please rate us in your podcast app. It's amazingly easy and fast and free. In fact, you could probably do it like right now as I'm speaking, and have it finished before the actual show begins in a moment. It's that fast. I'll put it to you this way. It helps us more than it will be a pain in the ass for you, if that basic math makes sense. So please give us a hand. As you'll hear from some of the context in this show coming up, this was actually the second interview that I recorded for this series. And it was before I figured out that I could not license copyrighted music for the program, so at one point I reference having played one of Slaid's songs earlier in the broadcast, But, of course, as I've explained before, that's not legally possible. The essential Slaid Cleaves will be available, though, via the Spotify playlist that I've curated of his favorite songs of mine, or my favorite songs of his. So head over to my Spotify profile to check those out. I'll also send out a blast for that on Instagram. Also, just as a preemptive correction, you'll hear me say that our guest graduated with a degree in English, when in fact it was a degree in philosophy. We caught that when I sent him the episode for a final sign-off. That's it. Thanks for joining us today, and without further ado, here's our show. My guest this month is Slaid Cleaves. Born in 1964 and raised in South Berwick, Maine, he would earn a degree in English from Tufts University before migrating down south. He moved to Austin in 1991 and cut his teeth as the sound engineer at the University of Texas's legendary Cactus Cafe, an institution which is a spiritual home to this day for Americana music in the Lone Star State. He got off to a quick start, the very next year winning the prestigious New Folk Award at the Kerrville Folk Festival. Past recipients include Nancy Griffith and Steve Earle. He struck up a creative partnership with former Lucinda Williams guitarist and record producer Gurf Morlix, which would bear fruit over the years. In 1997, he signed to the Rounder Records folk imprint, Philo Records, a one-time home to dyed-in-the-wool folkies Dave Van Ronk and Utah Phillips. The novelist Stephen King once said of Slaid, quote, "I'm not good when it comes to talking about music, but I know what works for me, what comes across as 100% authentic. Slaid Cleaves is that thing. He starts in, and something inside the listener speaks up and says, 'You're home.'" The New York Times once touted him as one of the finest songwriters in Texas. High praise indeed. Myself, I was turned on to his music years ago, when none other than Josh Ritter buttonholed me and spoke the gospel of Slaid, of his great voice, his lyrics, of his wit and kindness. Needless to say, it was an honor to drive down from Austin to Slaid's house in Wimberley, Texas, to hear about the musical path he's carved over the last 20 years. Well, cool. Well, thanks for joining me.
Of course.
Slaid, and thanks for having me out at your spread here in Wimberley. The one house untouched by the floods.
Right. Up on the hill.
Yeah, man.
Pays to be on the hill.
If we could start at the start, it's the early 90s. You've graduated from Tufts University. You are speeding towards Austin, Texas from Maine in a car. What's in the rearview mirror that you're leaving at that point to come down to Austin?
Well, Portland, Maine, which I drifted into after graduating from college. I ended up in Portland, which is a great little city. It's the biggest town in Maine, but it's only 60,000 people. So it's a very manageable city.
Still?
Yeah,
wow.
Amazingly. Yeah, Maine has, I think, lost population over the last 20 years. Because it's a hard place to make a living. It's a great little art scene, great little music scene there. An art school, lots of cool little clubs. That's where I started literally busking, street singing, and then working my way into just sort of happy hour and 9 to 1 kind of club.
Yeah.
Setting up in the corner and playing mostly covers at that time. I was just starting to write.
Yeah.
But, after years through high school and college kind of wanting to be a musician, but not knowing how to go about it and being told by everyone around me that, oh, that's a nice hobby, but, you'll never make any money doing that.
They were right.
Well, kind of.
No,
but
I'm just kidding.
At one point, I had been trying to make a living with my philosophy degree and was working printing pictures in a darkroom full time for $4 an hour. Think about that, $4 an hour
Unbelievable.
40 hours a week. That's 160 gross. Take out taxes. I was living on $140 a week.
Wow.
Sleeping in the attic of my girlfriend's mother, and just bare bones existence. And playing open mics down in Portland at night, and eventually put together a little demo tape of like the popular songs of the day. I think I had some Traveling Wilburys and a Roy Orbison song or something. This is in like 1988 or 9, and got these gigs at bars, just playing for 10 or 20 or 50 people in a bar, and mostly background music, restaurants. But eventually working my own covers in, my own songs in, and playing interesting covers too. Playing,
right.
I did play American Pie maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
But mostly I was playing like cool stuff like old Beatles songs and playing a lot of old Hank Williams songs and Woody Guthrie and all the songs I was playing on the street corner, just sort of my heroes. So that's what I left behind is a sort of making a living as a barroom singer and making a living as a musician, which I didn't think I'd ever be able to do. It was such a thrill to quit that day job.
Oh man!
And live off of playing 6 or 8 shows a month. We called it. Me and my brothers and cousins were all gathered in Portland that summer, just kind of eating happy hour food and working temp jobs, and we called ourselves the Men of Leisure.
That sounds about right. So that's what's in the rearview mirror. What are you seeing ahead of you through the windshield as you're heading down to Austin? What was lying ahead of you at that point?
Well, like I said, after playing 2 or 3 years in bars, it started to become kind of unfulfilling. I wanted to do my own songs. I wanted to play concerts, And I was playing in a band, too, called the Moxie Men, a really cool little kind of Uncle Tupelo type of rootsy Americana band before they even coined the terms. Kind of we went from Husker Du to Hank Williams to Mahalia Jackson, and then my originals.
Yeah.
It's just me and a drummer and a bass player, very bare bones. And we became the talk of the town in the little tiny Portland music scene, playing for 150 people at the club, but we're at square zero everywhere else, So it was time to hit the road and start a career in a music town, time to take a shot at that. So I thought about, I'd gone to school in Boston. I was kind of soured on Boston. It's kind of a hard city to live in. The weather's bad, the traffic's bad, the people are pissed off most of the time. Most of them. Yeah, it's a tough town. So I had enough of Boston at that point. And, New York and LA, they're just too big for a small town guy like me. And Seattle was too wet, and Minneapolis was too cold. And,
so you kind of Goldilocks.
Yeah.
You're right.
Athens was had gone through the scene, kind of faded then by the early 90s. And I went to Nashville to check it out just for a couple of days. And it was obvious that, that was in the early 90s. They were just so focused on the pop country thing. That's not true. In the late 80s, early 90s, there was that, what was it called? The Great Credibility Scare or something like that.
Yeah, so you had like your Steve Earles and your, there was Steve, there was Dwight Yoakam, and I feel like there was a third.
Well, Rodney Crowell was doing really cool stuff there at that point, and Kevin Welch, and I had picked up a few of those records, and that seemed like a really promising way to go. But I just had no connection whatsoever. I went to Nashville, and all I saw was Music Row, and I thought, it's all commercial. I can't break into here. Mm-hmm. I need to go somewhere to apprentice. I knew that, and I'd seen Joe Ely on TV up in Maine, and I thought of myself, and I'd seen Austin City Limits, the TV show, for years growing up in Maine, and I just had this instinct that Austin would be just the right place. Oh, and also I had read a Rolling Stone article about South by Southwest, which was just starting, and I think the article said it was heaven with a Texas zip code or something like that. And those 3 things: Austin City Limits, Joe Ely, and South by Southwest, all just kind of pointed stylistically and sort of contemporarily. That seemed to be the place that was up and coming. And that seemed to be the place where I could apprentice. I thought, if I could just go and watch Joe Ely and listen to Williams and Lyle Lovett up close and learn from them. And of course, I discovered that whole scene once I got here.
Yeah, that was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And so, I'd never even heard of Guy Clark and Ray Wiley Hubbard, but as soon as I got here, I did, of course. And I just apprenticed under those guys for the first few years, and that became my basis here in Austin.
So when you say you apprenticed them, was it easy enough to just, you just came to town and you were able to make contact with these folks and play shows with them, or
it wasn't
carry
easy.
the guitar case, or?
Well, yeah, that was kind of the plan. It wasn't easy at all. I had no entrees anywhere. I had no connections anywhere. So I got here and passed my tape around from Boomers to the Cactus Cafe to try to get whatever kind of gig I could get. And got no response whatsoever.
Of course.
Was reduced to going back to the streets, starting at square one. I played on 6th Street in the alcove of the Ritz Theater, which was a derelict theater at the time.
Yeah.
And playing the Chicago House open mic and the Saxon Pub open mic with Olin Merle and the Cactus open mic and the Austin Outhouse open mic, and eventually met friends and was introduced to the Kerrville Folk Festival, met musicians to collaborate with, and I think through the Kerrville New Folk Awards, I got a gig at Port David's opening for Joe Ely. So after a couple of years of trying, I kind of hit that goal. Mm-hmm. And eventually met Ray Wiley Hubbard and guys from the Austin Lounge Lizards and a few others that Jimmy LaFave, who kind of saw me struggling at the open mics and saw some promise and were very, very gracious and would invite me to open shows or join them on tours. And that's when I really started learning, is watching those guys up close.
Mm-hmm. So Kerrville, it's so funny what you just described is such a, I feel like that's always the missing link. Like when you hear someone that you like and you're like, oh man, like how did you make it happen? How did you get there? And they're like, well, I started there. Then the next thing you knew, I was playing theaters. And it's like, but no, how did you, what you just described really was just putting one foot in front of the other in a working type of way.
Yeah, they were very small steps, very interspersed with months and months of me pulling my hair out and trying to figure out what I was doing wrong and just, thankful for the tiny little baby steps I was making, but frustrated and really anxious to get going. It took about, it was about 8 years in Austin of just kind of learning and apprenticing and trying to do everything myself and trying to build a mailing list and trying to build a following and trying to book tours back and forth between Texas and Maine, which was very difficult at first, of course. Mm-hmm. Trying to get on the radio, trying to get press, trying to get to know everybody in the scene.
And some of this is pre-internet? Or pre-ubiquity of internet, at least?
Well, yeah. Well, about halfway through, it was pretty much pre-internet. Yeah, all through basically the early to mid-'90s. And then in the mid-'90s, I hooked up with Ken Irwin from Rounder Records, who we kind of started a conversation, and he had his eye on me, and he saw me play at a little tiny Outlaw South by showcase, I think, probably in 94. And then in 95, I remember, or maybe in 96, I asked him, so I wanted to keep in touch with him. And I said, what's the best way to get hold of you, Ken? And he said, well, I'm doing this new thing called email. And he had to kind of explain it to me. And I had bought a little tiny laptop just to do my mailing list, but I wasn't connected yet. I didn't even have a modem. Yeah. I literally went to, Home Office Depot and bought a modem and hooked it up and got an email account with AOL. Yeah. Just so I could be in touch with Ken Irwin. And that really impressed him, just the initiative that I got online just to talk to him, that let him know how serious I was and how dedicated. My sights were never set super high, but I was very determined to get to that point where I could have an audience and could quit my day jobs and support myself as a musician. And he saw that and just kind of kept watching me until I kind of threw a Hail Mary and made my own demo at home, rented a DAT machine from Rock and Roll Reynolds.
A DAT, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
I recorded a demo of a record on a DAT machine in 1995. And
with almost like the VCR videotapes. Right?
It takes 4 or 5 seconds for it to load.
Right.
Yeah, I just had a couple guys over to the house and recorded demo versions of my new batch of songs and sent cassettes out to the 6 or 7 label, independent label contacts I had made. Mm-hmm. And nobody got back to me until Ken bumped into me at South by Southwest and said, "Hey, we might want to help you out with that." And then he left, and I was like, "What? What does that mean?
Hey.
What does that mean?"
Yeah.
So I called him up, and he said, "Yeah, we'd like to. Let's do a record."
And this would eventually become No Angel Knows?
We got it. Yeah.
Cool.
Within the next months, we were in the studio with Gurf Morlix and made that first record.
So back up a little bit on that. How did you meet Gurf? Was it via Rounder and Philo Records, or had you just known Gurf here in town beforehand?
I didn't know him beforehand. I'd seen him play and I'd heard his work. I remember literally when I was fixing up the Dodge Dart Sport to get ready for our big move to Austin, I heard the Lucinda song "Hot Blood" on the local radio station. Mm-hmm. And I just think of what the sound of that. It's that Gurf Morlix, Gurf Lucinda combination of just rock and elegance and coolness.
Oh my gosh!
So much cooler than everything else that was on the radio.
That first ACL taping of hers, where it's her and like basically the 3-piece band with Gurf singing and playing guitar. Mm. He is so excellent, cover to cover on that thing. His playing, and he's covering all the melodic ground, playing and singing. It's so great.
Yeah, I heard that and I looked up who it was, and I started. I saw him around town a couple of times. I think I saw him out at Kerrville and down at Art's Rib House or something. And I didn't meet him yet, but whenever he was in the audience, I tried to impress him. I was on there. I said, I got to be good for Gurf.
Right.
And then when I got the go-ahead to make a record with Rounder, this is my first time ever being able to hire a producer. The budget was tiny, but it was, it was the first time I wasn't self-funded. And he was number one on the list. I think I sent cassettes of 3 or 4 songs to Gurf and Lloyd Maines and maybe one other person, I can't remember. But Gurf got back to me and said, "Yeah, it sounds good. Let's do it." And years later, I ran into Lloyd, who was really sweet. He said, "Man, I was so busy when you sent that tape. I just didn't have time to even check it out, and I'm kicking myself." Yeah.
Lloyd Maines, for people who don't know him, he's from Lubbock and got his start playing in Joe Ely's band originally, and he's gone on to play on albums from everyone from Uncle Tupelo to the Dixie Chicks, because his daughter Natalie is the main singer-songwriter there. Your relationship with Gurf has been very fruitful over the years. I mean, you've made, is it now 4 albums over the years with?
Let's see. We did No Angel and Broke Down and Wishbones and Holiday Sampler, which is just an EP, and then Most of Everything You Love.
Most of Everything You Love.
So it was on the 5th project that, that feeling started to set in when we felt like we had got all that we could out of each other, and we were getting a little bit anxious and antsy to move on.
Oh, really?
And that happens. I mean, I think, who was it? Tom Petty said, there should be a law that after the 3rd record you make with a producer, you can't do another one.
You shoot your producer, I think is what he said.
That's what he said.
Actually, I think it might have been the irascible Jimmy Iovine in that Petty documentary.
We made it through. We're still great friends and try to do stuff together here and there. But it was an incredibly fruitful collaboration, just musically and personally. Gurf is one of my favorite people in the whole world.
The road to success was a winding one for Slaid. In the late 90s, he was still working a series of dead-end jobs to get by, including, notoriously, as a human drug test subject for the company Pharmaco. He had gone deeply into personal debt to fund his passion. In the year 2000, he released an album which lifted him, in his own words, from, quote, total obscurity to relative obscurity. The review in the Austin Chronicle began, "Well, that settles it. Slaid Cleaves, with a big assist from his producer and jack-of-all-trades musician Gurf Morlix, has supplied us with the first great Austin album of the 21st century." The album broke down, received radio play, and allowed Slaid to reach a national and international audience at last. He didn't need to work on Maggie's farm no more. He was going to make a living on the road, bringing his songs to a devoted fan base around the States and abroad. When you made, in 2000, you made your second record with Gurf, a record called Broke Down, and that is what finally put you on the map nationally. Did you know that you were making that record that was going to have that impact on your career while you were making it?
Yeah, I remember people asking me that when it came out, because it was a breakthrough record for sure. And my response was always that, that's exactly what I've been trying to do for 10 years. So it wasn't surprising, it was gratifying. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, I realized just how extremely lucky I was to be kind of in the right place at the right time and to have built up, in hindsight, what was quite a bit of momentum, just getting to know people in the business, both musicians, but also, record company people and radio people and press people and publicists and all that, just people in the industry. I was building all those relationships, and it didn't look, I was still losing money. I didn't have an audience yet, but all those little foundational blocks were being laid. And then Broke Down came out, and, I really did put everything I had into that record. I really, I just treated the songs, I was harder on that batch of songs than I had ever been before. Just really learned how to be self-critical, just out of desperation, because everything I did before had failed. I was still going into debt. So just the songwriting, I just took that to another level, and the production as well. The first record I made with Gurf, No Angel Knows, I kind of took a back seat and let him produce it because I didn't know what I was doing. I just deferred to Gurf. But by the time we were working on the second record together, I'd kind of built up a little more confidence and kind of stuck up for different ideas, for my own ideas, and not in opposition to Gurf, but in cooperation and collaboration. So, and I just didn't settle. I think with No Angel Knows, I kind of thought, well, if Gurf says it's okay, it must be okay.
Right.
But with Broke Down, I drove him, I made him pull his hair out a few times, where I kept doing things over and over until I either got him right or convinced myself that I couldn't do it any better. This is the limits of my ability.
Yeah.
And then also with the promotion of it, I just pulled out every stop. I went farther into debt and wrote letters to every DJ that had ever spun my record and cajoled them to play this new one, and, just kind of focused. I remember, like pitching one song to KLBJ and one song to KVET and one song to KGSR and one song to KUT, just trying to get every angle I could possibly cover. And lo and behold, people played the song on the radio and in a big way. And that's the other luck part is I had a label behind me. I had all these foundational blocks I've been building, and terrestrial radio, there was no internet radio, there was no XM radio, satellite radio. Terrestrial radio had some real bright spots, and community radio and, really cool forward-thinking community stations like KGSR in Austin and WFUV in New York City and a dozen or two others across the country jumped on that song and played it in rotation, 4 or 5 times a day for month after month after month. Man. And so, my crowd I literally went from playing for 6 people in Flipnotics to within 6 months playing for 100 people at the Cactus Cafe and 100 other towns around the country.
Yes. Yeah, that is the amazing part of getting some mechanical advantage with technology and industry. There's no feeling like there is the first time that you go to a town that you've never been to, and there's people there that know the songs. You're just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I remember that feeling. It was in upstate New York, and within months after the record came out, and I was so used to a gig of mine being trying to win people over, saying, here's my new song, check it out. And then, like you said, I remember playing the song Horseshoe Lounge and people like getting all perked up and their eyes brightening up. And I could tell, they had heard that song on the radio and they were thrilled to see the singer, 10 feet away from them singing it in person for the first time. And you're right, there's nothing more thrilling than having a bunch of strangers show up and know your music and want to hear it.
It is one of the greatest pleasures I've ever felt in life. I want to go back really quick. You were talking about, you think one of the reasons that album was successful for you is because you said you were the hardest that you ever were on the songs, on a batch of songs up until that point. How do you strike the balance? I always have a problem with this. How do you strike the balance between being very self-critical, that you need to be on one hand, but then on the other hand, not just going down a wormhole where nothing is good enough and you kind of paralyze yourself with a lack of making decisions at a certain point?
Well, for a long time, I wasn't able to be self-critical. I wrote songs sort of emotionally and figured if there were 3 verses and they rhymed and a chorus, and it made me feel something, great, it's done, move on to the next one. And I wrote typically, I remember, this is probably some bad advice, but from Hank Williams, who said that if you can't finish a song up in 40 minutes, then give up on it. Start something else. So that
It sounds like the one take Frank Sinatra thing.
Yeah. So, he forgot to say in that advice that if you're Hank Williams and you can't finish a song in 40 minutes, give up on it. So for years, I ascribed to that advice. And eventually, at some point, when just the marketplace was telling me that my product was not sufficiently desirable to the masses, I thought, well, I got to do something different here. And I think opening up to songwriting kind of allowed me to feel less precious about the songs. And somehow I turned the corner where I thought the song doesn't matter if the song works for me, it has to work for other people. I have to induce some kind of reaction in other people. And that thought evolved into the philosophy that it's not my job to tell you how I feel. It's my job to tell you how you feel. Or to put it in less stringent terms, it's my job to articulate what you're feeling, before you can put it into words. I'm going to put it into words for you. And that's why you're going to react to this song. And also combine that with, I just wanted to make an emotional reaction in people. And when I was working on the songs for Broke Down, I thought, well, what emotional reaction do I want? And I thought, well, my history is all pointing to this one place, is that I want to make people cry. I want to write the most tragic songs possible. That's what moved me over the years. And I actually thought of it in terms of that was a niche that wasn't being filled. I thought, nobody's writing tragic songs. One of my favorite records of my parents was a Louvin Brothers album called Tragic Songs of Life. And that's kind of what I aspired to.
The follow-up to Satan is Real.
Exactly. That's what music needed in my eyes.
Yeah.
And so I became super self-critical at that point, and I think I applied a new rule. I left the Hank Williams 40-minute rule and applied the Bob Dylan rule that every line of a song should be good enough to be the chorus.
Okay. Wow.
And so I just kind of hammered my songs over and over and over until every word counted and every line counted. And to get back to your question, if as to when do you stop that? There's 2 answers to that. I guess the first answer is, when do you start being self-critical? Because you can't start writing so self-critically.
No,
you got to let the critics. You got to let that part of you got to let that door shut.
And just to be clear, you're talking about even just on a song-by-song basis, you can't start by being self-critical.
Yeah. When you're in the early stages of writing, you have to write everything down.
Right.
And just sort of consider everything. and not be self-critical until the song starts to take shape, until you've got your verses and your choruses and your language in there, and then you start fine-tuning the language. But my other favorite quote is that, I can't remember who said this, but some famous poet said, poets don't finish their poems, they abandon them.
Like in the sense that you could always go deeper.
Yeah, but at some point you just give up on them and move on to something else. But it comes after frustration and angst and hair pulling that you try to make the song as good as it possibly can be, every syllable. And then at some point you just say, I just can't do this anymore.
No, entirely. After you took your producer into a field after a couple hours in the rain and shot him, you began work a new relationship with Austin's Scrappy Judd Newcomb, and it sounds great. Scrappy produced your latest one, Still Fighting the War. How did you meet Scrappy, and how did that relationship begin?
Well, I saw Scrappy in my early years in Austin, the early 90s, playing with Beaver Nelson and Walter Traggart and the Loose Diamonds, and just sort of looked up to him as this rock and roll character. He was so cool. He was so skinny with his cigarette and his low slung guitar and playing great music and
never
bands.
moves too fast. Very an economy of motion with him that makes him look cool. I know.
Yeah. So he was just always a character that I was intrigued by and impressed with his musicianship. And he produced a record by Chris Montgomery, who was in the band Aunt Beanie's First Prize Beats, which is a really great record, and I actually covered a song from it years later. So I just was a fan of his work, and years ago thought about, working with him, and he was always just so damn busy for years that we just couldn't find a space. He'd always be booked up. But, the stars aligned at one point about 3 years ago when I needed a guy and he needed a gig, and so it was just a perfect match, as we thought it would be,
Sure.
He started playing shows, and it immediately when the confirmation, when it was confirmed that this was a good match that we both thought it would be, he just seemed like a no-brainer to ask to produce the latest record. But actually, I had a hard time deciding when I had the new batch of songs for Still Fighting the War. This is about 4 years ago. I couldn't decide who to use. I had worked on other projects other people's projects with Lloyd Maines and with Mark Hallman, like singing backup vocals or something like that, or one-off projects. And I love the work of those two guys. I love Scrappy's work. Those are my three favorite producers in town after Gurf. And I couldn't decide who to choose because it's such a momentous decision. Like, you put
It's a
your heart
creative
and soul,
partner, yeah.
into this batch of songs, and you don't want someone to fuck it up. You want to trust someone with your life here, your creative life, and it is an intense relationship. And I didn't know these three guys very well, Mark and Lloyd and Scrappy. So what I decided to do is I made just vocal and guitar demos at home, and I sent some songs to Scrappy and some songs to Mark and some songs to Lloyd, the ones that I thought they would do best, and said, just whip up something on these. Actually, that's not true. I sent songs to Lloyd Maines and Mark Hallman, and then went off on tour and said, do what you do on these songs, and we'll see what happens while I'm touring. With Scrappy, I actually went into the studio and did a bunch of songs together with him. So I had three producers at one time working on various songs.
Yeah.
And when I got back from tour, I just sat down with Mark and Lloyd and finished up their songs and finished up the ones I'd started with Scrappy. So there's actually three producers on the record. Scrappy ended up with more cuts than the other guys.
Right. In my mind, he is the producer with that record.
He produced the bulk of it.
Yeah.
Just because we hit it off so well so early on and just kind of kept building on it.
My favorite song on that record, which I first heard you play at the Cactus, and then I listen to it all the time, is I Bet She Does.
Oh, cool.
Can you tell me the kernel of that song and how you ended up writing that one?
Do you know the story?
I'm going. I just want to hear you tell the story. This is a great. I heard the song. Just to put you this way, I heard the song and had no idea what the kernel for the song was.
Right.
To me, it was just a great rhetorical song, and hopefully I'll have played the song already in the podcast before this, so people will know what I'm talking about.
Well, I was reading an article in the Chronicle about Lucinda Williams, and this is 10 or so years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And as most people know, Gurf Morlix produced a couple of her records as she shot into fame, but then they had this acrimonious falling out. They didn't speak to each other for years and years. And I believe somebody interviewed Gurf for this Lucinda article and was telling Gurf how much Lucinda misses Gurf. And Gurf's only response was, "I bet she does," which is classic Gurf understatement. There's so much in that sentence that Gurf speaks the way he produces with great elegance and understatement and some subtle wit.
It's like a kiss off from like an early Dylan song, almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like the same sentiment as "Don't Think Twice" or something.
Yeah. I sat on that for years and years and tried it on and off for years and years and was so thrilled when I finally got it into a form that I could actually record it and perform it. And I'm real happy with the way it turned out.
It's a diamond of a song. It's one of those songs where there's just not an inch of fat on it, and it's like all the parts fit together, and you just get the feeling that if you broke it apart and put the parts together in a different way, they'd all fit together again, if that makes any sense. Like, it's just, I love that song.
It's an interesting observation.
Austin, Texas is the city of the Violet Crown. The name may come from the color of the surrounding hill country at sunset, or it may have been a sarcastic comparison to Athens, Greece, made by the famous short story writer and 19th century Austinite O. Henry, who felt his city was being presumptuous in thinking of itself as the, quote, Athens of the South. When Slaid moved to Austin in the early 90s, the population was just under 500,000. Last summer, in 2015, it was estimated that the population in the surrounding 5 counties had surpassed 2 million. Currently, Forbes lists it as the nation's fastest growing city. Although it may read Live Music Capital of the World in the Tourism Bureau brochure, today's new arrivals in Austin are more likely to be submitting resumes to tech companies than posting drummer wanted flyers on the walls of a music store. Arguably, the city is now defined more by its tech industry than by its musical heritage. Apple, Google, Facebook, and Oracle all have satellite operations in the city today, leading natives to derisively refer to the city's new face as San Fran Austin. Austin is many things today, but weird is not one of them. I'm one of the party crashers myself. My wife and I moved to Austin in 2010, and we moved into the city's historically black East Side. Now, 6 years later, with gentrification in full effect, rising property taxes have dislodged communities which have made their home here for over a century. It's very complicated, and I wanted to get Slaid's perspective on the changing nature of the city he knows so well. I'm going to try and let me see if I can come at this thing I want to talk about here and see if I can give you the bait and goad you into it. You recorded live at the Horseshoe Lounge, presumably because of your song Down at the Horseshoe Lounge. And I read an interview with you once where you said, when I first moved to Austin, Texas, I was almost like afraid to go into the Horseshoe. And what I'm getting at here is, these days, I don't think that there is a single place in Austin, Texas that I would be afraid to go into. If you see what I'm getting at. Yeah. What was Austin like when you first moved here, and how is it different now? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And here's 50 minutes for you to go ahead and expound on that huge topic there.
That is huge. I sure have seen a lot of changes in 24 years. Austin was more like the rest of Texas back then, you know? It's more like a generic city now. It could be anywhere in the U.S. You know, not completely, but it's trended that way. And so there were stretches of Burnett Road and South Lamar that were kind of old school, with gun shops and pawn shops and kind of seedy looking bars with no windows in them. And I was literally scared to go to the Horseshoe Lounge. I lived right around the corner, but it just looked like the kind of place that you'd open up the door and the needle would skip across the record and everyone would turn around and look at you, I did eventually go in with Gurf, actually, I think, with the first time. And, of course, it was just your friendly neighborhood bar. It was wonderful. And, of course, and there are some weird characters there back then. But there still are hidden gems. Have you ever been to the Cloakroom?
Brother, So, where I live? I live in Sweet Hill, really close to there. Yeah. And so my wife fucking hates the Cloakroom. The Cloakroom it's the place where all the politicos drank from the Texas Capitol, from the legislature. Now, what people need to understand about the Texas legislature is Texas hates government so much that the legislature only meets once every 2 years. So that's when the Cloakroom is like this little tiny bar that maybe fits 40 people capacity. It's run by, what's the woman that runs it? What's her name? Beverly runs it with an iron fist. There's like a closed circuit tube television that goes like straight to the house floor.
Right.
There's a crock pot full of boiled hot dogs or chili.
It's incredibly dark.
It is incredibly dark. And there's all these political fixers there. And, I fucking love that bar so much. It's one of my favorites.
My wife worked there for 3 years.
Did she really?
Yeah, she cocktail waitressed and then bartended with Beverly. They were quite a pair.
Your wife worked with Beverly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever get to interact with Beverly?
Oh, yeah. Yes. And yep, she's one of a kind.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I think I got really into that place because since I lived close to it, and then I finished I read the Cairo Lyndon Johnson books when I moved down here to kind of get acclimated to Texas, and I got really interested in politics, and I would just start, my wife's a teacher, and she'd go to bed early, and I'd just kind of go down to the Cloakroom and just kind of grab a beer by myself and eavesdrop on conversations. It was really fun. Yeah. Have you been there recently?
It's been a few years. We pop in and catch up with Bev every couple of years, but it's been a while. We're due for a visit.
All right. Well, if you head back to the Cloakroom, send me a text and I'll come over. And
all right.
There's certainly no artisanal craft beer on tap at the old Cloakroom.
No, there's not.
How do you, when you are approaching touring, what is your relationship to touring? Is touring something that you look forward to a great deal? Is touring something that you look at as a necessity to make money? Is touring, how do you approach that facet of your job?
Well, of course, it's evolved over the years. I mean, 20 years ago, it was something that everything I did was geared towards being able to tour. Was finding an audience across the country so I could tour and make a living, not just play in my hometown. And so I toured as much as I possibly could, damn the costs and everything, and for several years. And as you get older and as I built my audience, I've sort of narrowed down the number of shows we do per year. As I get older, I just physically, it's harder on the body, and I want to stay home and I want to be with my wife. And she's road manager now, so we tour together. That makes it a lot easier. Yeah. So right now, it's a necessity. This is how I make my living. Compared to royalties or sales, the touring income is still the vast majority, maybe 3/4 of what we live on. So it's a necessity, but I also feel extremely fortunate that I have an audience nationwide and over in Europe a little bit too, that I can make a living visiting these cities once a year or twice a year in some cases, or once every 2 years in some cases.
Right.
So yeah, I just Karen became road manager 4 or 5 years ago, and kind of she comes from more of a business background, so she made things a lot more efficient, and that was sad that I wasn't able to tour with a band anymore because just economically
Yeah.
It didn't work out. I could tour with a band, but Karen would have to have a day job to support that. And that's
Right.
how it worked for a few years. And then we realized, well, if I tour solo duo, Karen could be road manager and we'd be all in-house. And that's how it's been for the last few years. And, like I said, there's been 20 years of foundation laid, and I feel very fortunate that my fans are still trickling in. They trickle out and they trickle in, and I've reached sort of a critical mass where it's been pretty steady for the last 15 years or so, where I can go out there and 75 to 150 people will show up in most towns, and a little more here, a little more less there, but definitely enough to pay for the expenses of travel and living. So I'm a lucky guy.
There's a corollary to going to a town for the first time and having people be there, that it's a totally different feeling, but it feels really great to 8 years later, however many years later, come back to a town and there's someone who's been there every time you've come. And it's kind of like the difference between like first falling in love and then like being in a relationship for a long time and kind of like reflecting for a moment on like, wow, I just know this person so well. And it's a real devotion that people will come out over the years to see shows, you know?
Yeah. It really makes me feel fortunate. These days I run into at least one or two people or couples who say, yeah, we saw you in 2000 at Anderson Fair, and they're back after 15 years. It's bizarre. And literally I ask them, where'd you go? What happened? And a lot of times they say, well, we had a kid and, we just stopped going out for a while, but now we're out again.
Totally. And then they're on, one night before they go to bed, they're like, oh, let's jump on YouTube. Oh, remember when we saw Slaid Cleaves? Oh, yeah, Slaid is great. Oh, he's playing here. Let's go see him. It's so funny because you get so caught up in your own shit that it's a nice reminder that like, oh, someone forgot that my music existed for 15 years.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder.
Yeah.
Keeps you honest.
Yep.
Is there, when you're pulling up your tour itinerary, is there a place that you look at on the itinerary every time you're like, I can't wait to get to this club. The people at this club are awesome. People at this theater are great.
Well, thankfully, over the last dozen or so years, what we've done is just kind of weeded out the bad ones, and we only play the great ones now. That's what's really cool about being at this stage in my career is we've found our place in each city, most places. We found our the Kumbwa in Santa Cruz. It's just always great. People have been coming to see music there for whatever 20 years, and they've been coming to see us there for 10 or 15 years, and it's just a community. It's a relationship, and it's just very strong and rich. And we've gone to some towns and just haven't found our place, and we've just given up on them. I don't play in Nashville anymore because I just couldn't find the right place. It made it worth going there.
I love the basement, but when I hit like a dozen times playing the basement, it's just like, okay, well, let's just call this good. Yeah, man. I think this has been great. Just to finish up, when do I get to hear a new Slaid Cleaves album? What's up next? Are you going to release an album, an EP? Are you going to release a single? What are things looking like?
I'm not thinking release ideas. I'm going to be sitting right here at this table, finishing up a batch of songs. I'm about 90% there. It's time to start booking some recording time, maybe in March or April of this year, 2016. Ideally, I'll have an album underway in the first half of this year, and maybe finish it the end of this year, maybe put it out early next year. And then once I have it in the can, I'll have to decide how to release it, whether to just sell it on my website or, try to get a wider release, try to use one of these 30 Tigers type places to spread it around the world, or whether I just want to sell it to my fans. Over the last several years, I just feel like I've sort of reached a ceiling that it just sort of reflects my level of talent and commitment and whatever that, I'm not going to get much bigger than I am. I'm going to hopefully hold on to this group of several thousand fans that I have and and try to keep him interested for the next 20 years until I'm ready to retire. And that's kind of the goal.
Thank you for sitting down and doing this. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Joe. It's been real enjoyable. Yeah, you're getting really good at this already. This is your second one, right?
Number 2, yeah.
Wow.
Number 2. Yeah, thank you.
Nice job.
Slaid,
Yeah.
That's our show for this month, you guys. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, the best way to support is to write a brief review over in the iTunes store or through your podcast app. It just takes a few moments, it's free, and it helps us out a great deal. Thank you to Slaid's wife and manager, Karen Cleaves, for making the interview possible. This episode was engineered by Matt Schusler. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, remember, an expensive microphone is not a song. A record deal is not a song, and I'm sorry, but reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.